I've been reading the comments, and a lot of people ask, does this work for central sleep apnea? Does this work for central sleep apnea? And I wanted to give you a definitive answer on what I believe to be some of the best ways to target the pathways involved in the pathology of central sleep apnea. So if I had central sleep apnea, this is what I would do. And obviously, you should never do any of this. And if you don't have central sleep apnea, this is something helpful to watch as education. If you have obstructive sleep apnea, maybe you have complex sleep apnea, or maybe you don't know, you just want to learn the difference between the two and be able to do more. Because obstructive sleep apnea, most people understand how this works. You have some narrowing, fast, irregular breathing at night, pulls things together, not good. But again, that brings the question of, well, how does any of what I'm saying even apply to central sleep apnea? Because we're told, which is very largely true, that central sleep apnea starts in the brain and then has an issue with our diaphragm, right? And all the different breathing aspects from that. But the thing is, central sleep apnea can develop from obstructive sleep apnea, which should start to tell you that there is a big connection between these two that can be the key to unraveling central sleep apnea so you don't have to be stuck on a CPAP forever. Because pretty much PAP therapy, whether it's CPAP, BiPAP, or the automatic fancy PAP, that's really the only things you can do for central sleep apnea, well, at least offered at your local doctor's office. The unfortunate thing about central sleep apnea, it's probably more hopeless than obstructive sleep apnea because there's not a surgery, there's not a bunch of different devices. It's pretty much have some tubing on your face and your, mouth the rest of your life or suffer slowly or quickly. That's why I want to go over one, how central sleep apnea is not as different from obstructive as you think it is, because that will help us also understand the pathways of central sleep apnea and how we could potentially target those based on the research out there. Now, obviously, this is for educational purposes only. We're going to use scientific literature, cite it. We're going to look at things and sort of reverse engineer. Always consult with your healthcare provider about what to do with any information you may find out on the internet, because nothing we're talking about here is meant to diagnose, treat, manage, or any condition. And continue PAP therapy if you're on PAP therapy right now. Don't stop because you watched a YouTube video. Okay, don't do that. But what you should do without question is subscribe to the channel. So understanding the real difference between obstructive sleep apnea versus central sleep apnea, we'll have OSA versus CSA, is really, really important. So again, OSA, we have some enlarging in the airway, right? Cool, breath blocked off. Central is the brain's just not telling us to breathe. Now, that's very true, but there is some crossover here because it's not as just in these nice little neat boxes. Because I can tell you right now, with obstructive sleep apnea, we're always thinking, oh, there's an obstruction. It's in the name, right? That's how it has to be. But as luck would have it, about 50%, a little over 50%, I believe it's 54% in this paper, of patients with obstructive sleep apnea have non-anatomical drivers of obstructive sleep apnea. In plain English, what that means, in 54% of people with obstructive sleep apnea, if you look in their airway, they do not have an enlarged tongue. They do not have big adenoids. They do not have a small jaw. There's other stuff going on that leads to obstructions at night. That's a lot to reconcile because we had to think, why the heck does that happen? Because when we think of obstructive sleep apnea, it can be an anatomy issue, but at the end of the day, it leads to a breathing problem that then causes a collapse of the airway. So check it out really quickly here. 1953, way back in the day, hyperventilation at night found to cause sleep apnea. And this idea that airway inspiration, breathing in, creates this suction pressure, or negative pressure rather, that collapses the airway. And this can happen by itself, like we saw in 54% of people with OSA, but this can also happen if you do have an anatomy issue. It will just develop faster because when you have some sort of narrowing, it will lead to this faster, irregular breathing pattern, especially at night, and that will pull the airway shut. So that's what's going on with obstructive sleep apnea. Now, the reason this happens, and this will connect to central in a moment, the reason this happens is because of how our brainstem, you may want to write that down, how our brainstem interprets whether or not we should breathe. And it's known as respiratory loop gain. In obstructive, when our loop gain is too high, we're too sensitive. We're constantly overreacting to changes in CO2. We go from breathing normally, CO2 goes up a little bit, and then we breathe fast and irregular at night. That's what happens. It's not always at baseline. It's in response to something. A good healthy loop gain, a somewhat sensitive would be you can increase your CO2 like this much, and then you take a breath. So think of it like a breathing thermostat here. And it's something that's very important and very well researched. So some of the first good research on this, that sounded very elitist. The first good research was in 1985 on this, where they were looking at loop gain and how it was elevated in obstructive and not reduced by CPAP treatment, and also loop gain being one of the number one predictors of is surgery going to work or not. Once again, building the idea, there is a fundamental breathing pattern based out of our brainstem. Okay, there's a reason I'm saying that, not just because I want to sound smart and say, "Oh, he says brainstem. He must know something." So the brainstem has many great things, including great jokes like the medulla oblongata. Name that movie in the comments. But the reason this is important, because if we look at a graph of the function of breathing and airway flow between obstructive and central sleep apnea, this is where things get important. So I guess I'll let you guess, or I'll force you to guess here. So up top, we have airflow. I'll zoom in a little bit. We have airflow here. And what happens is we are breathing, breathing, breathing. You see how it's maybe a little bit faster here, a little bit faster. And then we stop breathing here. Now, if we look at the movement graphs here, you'll see that, there's a pause in movement, but there is like some movement here. Okay. There's some movement, there's some effort to breathe again. So that's the top one. And again, I'll make you guess which one's central versus obstructive. Now, if we look at this one here, we have, again, airflow, big peak in airflow. And then, okay, we stop breathing. And then here, we have movement again. Okay, but obviously, which one has way more movement? The bottom one does. So, which one is central sleep apnea? It's the top one. It's A. So, even though it looks like a little bit of movement, it's pretty negligible. But what goes on here is that your brain no longer tells your body to have a respiratory effort. Whereas in obstructive sleep apnea, you're still trying. You are still trying. You're trying to breathe and breathe and breathe and breathe. Nothing's happening. The point of me showing you this is to demonstrate how, if we think of our thermostat analogy, look at that. Good old crazy pectus. Well, it's not fast. It is fast irregular breathing. You have a fast irregular inhale because you have an oversensitive thermostat, and that leads to a block. Whereas in central sleep apnea, your thermostat just goes off. It just goes offline. It's like, see you later. You have a little bit of elevation here, but it just goes off. Shuts off. No breathing for you. So it's still the same thermostat. It's the brainstem, but it's slightly different problems of the brainstem. So with obstructive sleep apnea, it's oversensitive. With central sleep apnea, it just goes offline. It goes on vacation for seconds and, well, hopefully not minutes. That'd be really bad. So that's what's going on there, right? So to fix this, a little different, right? Obstructive sleep apnea, we want to desensitize. We want to expose ourselves to the problems like inability to sense CO2 so our body can correct it. But with central sleep apnea, the big difference is you need to like reboot the computer. You need to rewire it. You need to retrain it to actually respond to CO2. That's the big difference. But at the same time, it's a great similarity because it's along the same spectrum of where we just need to reboot over here, and obstructive sleep apnea is just like tweaking it. So they exist on the same spectrum, and this is also how you can go from obstructive to having central sleep apnea. Because when your brainstem is off all the time, then eventually it'll just kind of shut down for periods of time. Not good. So that's why we want to talk about what the heck. So how do we fix the software glitch of central sleep apnea? Kind of the whole main crux of this. We're going to look at scientific evidence, reverse engineer our way out of that for what we should target. And we're going to go out on a limb a little bit at times here, because a lot of times it is just as simple as looking at the basic mechanisms at the cell level and then learning how to apply that for ourselves. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people will point me like, oh, but you give like 13 tips and pointers. Shouldn't it just be one? No. Any one thing will apply to like 50% of people at any given time. About finding what works best for you. Okay, so let's go on. The first thing is the CO2 overload. That is a big part of rebooting the computer. You need to get some juice in there. And that's why, and you can also pick up some of these things. And again, I encourage you to talk to your doctor about this. So one of the first things has to do with a CO2 reboot. Now, there's an old drug, acetazolamide, and it has been shown to be helpful for obstructive and central sleep apnea. Again, pointing to the great similarities between the two as a functional brainstem breathing problem. Now, on this graph, which is terribly confusing, you'll see in gray, really, that color pops. What we're looking at here. The interpretation of this multifold Jacob and the color bar graphs here is showing that about 90% of the time, patients with central sleep apnea will experience a reduction in the severity of apnea episodes at night. And the majority of them, well, I guess the greatest proportion, will have a reduction of 75 to 50% from acetazolamide. And this is not just a one-off research study. This is a gold standard of research known as a meta-analysis. Take a bunch of studies, mush them together, and look at the results all together to get a clear picture. And the reason this happens is because acetazolamide will cause you to breathe a little bit faster. Now, you may have a light bulb saying, you just told me that breathing too fast was the problem in the beginning. Yes, but it's a fast or regular breath, not just fast by itself. That's like the simplification that I'm very guilty of oversimplifying things at times. So just we can pick up pieces one by one. But it's the irregularity, it's that loop gain response that I'll mention and I have today. When you have acetazolamide and you're overbreathing faster and faster, you will start to go to a constant level of CO2 when the drug's in your system. And that can actually help to correct the loop gain problem. So you're not as sensitive. And it'll also help reboot the brainstem because basically desensitizing or resensitizing are very similar at a molecular level. So acetazolamide would help with both, as shown by the research here. Now, of course, I'll go over other ways in which theoretically you could do the CO2 reboot in a moment here because I don't want you just go to your doctor and be like, hey, I watched a YouTube video. You mentioned like 5 drugs. Let's start, like, don't do that. Okay. Next one. Next mechanism here is an adenosine block here. So a study here that looked at this compound, theophylline or theophylline, however you want to say that, it's totally up to you. They found that when they gave people this compound, it dramatically reduced the episodes of central sleep apnea. People were at 26, brought them down to 6. Now, of course, pretty big variation here, plus or minus 20 to plus or minus 14. So, you know, individual mileage will vary here. But the reason this works is because this compound will block adenosine, and adenosine is a big part of what influences your brainstem and breathing. So if we correct that by blocking adenosine, then that will help with the response to breathing. Okay, so adenosine, keep that in the back of your brainstem, I guess. We'll have a brainstem central episode today. Next one is to stimulate the breathing centers, the brainstem, again here. Now, this is more of an experimental drug, especially in adults. It's only ever been used in preterm infants. However, when infants have apnea, it's almost always neurological. Okay, not almost always, but more often than not in comparison to adults. And they'll use this drug, doxapram, to help with that, and it's very helpful. Now, again, don't go out and be like, doctor, give me doxapram. But just know the mechanism because there's other ways in which you can do a fraction of the pharmacological power of this. It will stimulate there it is, the medullary, the medulla oblongata area. Yes, the medulla and the medulla oblongata. That's the only proper way you can say that word. You got to say it with the weird quasi-southern accent. Very similar areas of the brain will increase. Here we go again. It will increase the drive for breathing. What we want during a reboot. And last one, I'm pretty sure it's last one, is the phrenic nerve stimulation. So fundamentally, the problem with central sleep apnea is brain is not sending a signal to your diaphragm to pull down your lungs to pull air into your body. That's the fundamental breakdown. I'm clapping for emphasis. Okay, this is a strong public speaking tactic. When that isn't working, then the phrenic nerve pretty much atrophies. And that's just a basic principle of neuroplasticity. The pathways you use get stronger. The pathways you don't use weaken. So if you get some phrenic nerve stimulation, there is a device for this. Remedy, perhaps, I don't know how to pronounce this letter or what that is. Effectively, it is a phrenic nerve stimulator, and it is pretty helpful. They've done some, this would be a systematic review here of 13 different articles, and patients reported mild to marked improvement in quality of life here. They didn't all have AHI. Um, some of them did, and they were somewhat similar to the other things I've shown you here already. So those are the kind of basic pillars that's been shown in the research, and I want to show you other research. So much research, right? So fun, fascinating. Ugh. But other things that will also impact those pathways, because then that could potentially stimulate the respiratory centers, give you that reboot, and help with your sleep. Now, some other things that'll help with your sleep. If you've been learning and enjoying this new information, especially about a condition that doesn't get a whole lot of airtime, guess I'm guilty for that. But for everything related to sleep apnea, obstructive, central, complex sleep apnea, make sure you subscribe so you stay up to date with all the latest greatest information. And of course, other people out there who are looking for answers, insights, and things to be empowered about. Every time there's a new subscriber, YouTube will be like, hey, let's show this to more people. So go ahead, click subscribe, whether it's clicking down below or navigating the menu with your Roku remote and being able to address that here. So things to consider with your doctor's supervision. Again, here is the disclaimer. I won't read it again because I assume you can read. That's why you're on YouTube. But the biggest thing, continue PAP therapy if you're on PAP therapy, my friends, okay? Don't change anything you're doing without talking to your doctor. And of course, your individual mileage may vary. Now, with the CO2 reboot here, this is something that's been shown in the literature. Because, yes, it can be accomplished with acetazolamide, which would actually make CO2 low. My personal opinion is that a CO2 reboot can be done much better with higher level of CO2. And think about it. If you are trying to get over your phobia of spiders, you got two options. You can never see a spider again your entire life and live in a spider-free location. You can do that. Or you can overcome the discomfort of spiders and look at them and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So same thing with CO2 here, although I grossly oversimplified it. But there's something known as PAP therapy with enhanced expiratory rebreathing space, EERS. And don't show up to the office and say, hey, doctor, what do you know about ERS? Okay. You may have to hand them this paper. What this is when they attach this additional component to the mask. So you're actually breathing a little bit more CO2. So CO2 will be more elevated. And that has been shown to actually reduce apnea episodes and help reboot the breathing centers in the brain. So don't try to DIY this. I'm not sure the availability of this. It's going to vary doctor by doctor. Your primary care doctor, nothing against them. They just probably won't know anything about this. This would be more in the territory of a sleep medicine physician. Now, other ways you can apply this are rebreathing during breathing exercises, which is as simple as just combining these two concepts of using something, and heck, you could use a snorkel if you're super into that, but a paper bag would suffice, where you're doing something like box breathing, like 4 in, pause, 4 out, pause, while using a paper bag. Now, of course, talk to your doctor if that's appropriate for you, because being exposed to big increases in CO2 can always have a physiological consequence. Safest practices include doing it while seated or laying down. We'll talk about laying down in a moment, why that's important. That will just heighten the amount of CO2 to heighten the effectiveness of the exercises and help reboot. Right. Next is going to be the adenosine block, which is a little bit harder or less straightforward than you would think. So adenosine is blocked by things like caffeine. Yet I am telling you to stop drinking caffeine. Why is that? Because when you drink caffeine, yes, caffeine will block adenosine here. But then as a result, your body will actually make more adenosine. This is why if you quit caffeine after some time, you may have something known as like the caffeine flu, where you feel like crap for days on end because your body's producing more adenosine molecules and more adenosine receptors. So you would actually want to stop coffee for about like 5-7 days before introducing, well, either nothing, but if you do want to block adenosine in an actual productive way, you would want to use these alternative sources of caffeine. So either yerba mate, it's yerba, right? Not yerba. Probably sound like an idiot. I'm not gonna check. Or green tea. I prefer green tea to black tea. And if you are going to go with yerba mate, I should really look up things before I try to pronounce them. You would want to go with the French press or the tea bag method, just because traditional method will give you a ton more caffeine, which is not something necessarily that we want, right? And then the other one, which is a very special kind of tea. I know I said green and black tea, but this is the most efficacious tea here. I just keep putting myself in situations where I get made fun of pronunciation. Puer, you can read. There it is. And it's been shown scientifically with bar graphs to be the highest in these two compounds. This one we talked about earlier, theophylline, and also this one, theobromine, very high in that. The fermented puer tea here. They put puer. I can say puer. They wrote it there. So the point of all of this is showing the compounds or the concentration of these compounds as time goes on. It peaks around 2 hours afterwards, which is going to be important for us because this is something we want to stack with pretty much everything else we're talking about here. Well, at least the breathing exercises and something else I'll show you in a bit here. Because when you are doing breathing exercises at a time when you are having these compounds peaking in your body, they will be more effective in creating that reboot at a cellular level. So keep that in mind. So big story here is this tea or mate, whatever you want to do, you can go with green tea as well. But the best of the best is going to be this tea, which I haven't personally had. People say it is distinct. So maybe get a little bit before you get a lot of it. Try it out. All right. Now, the reason I bring this up is you want to ingest this in the morning, preferably. Obviously, don't have a bunch of caffeine before sleep, right? And if you do your breathing exercises when that stuff is at its peak, again, becomes more effective. So you can do that with the rebreather, super duper effective. Now, the next thing is to stimulate the breathing centers directly here. Now, there's not a whole lot of things that can do this with a high level of safety, but one thing is this compound here. Let's go for it. Lobelia, sure, why not? It has been shown to be helpful because one, it can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is something we need, and then it will stimulate the brainstem to help you breathe more. That's what we want. So there you go. So you can consider this in a stack here. And the very last thing is to stack books on top of your abdomen, because if we're doing breathing exercises, right, we want to make sure we're maximally stimulating the phrenic nerve as well. Because the more you can do things that stimulate the whole kit and caboodle together, then at night, then that pathway will be on more often. Because the whole problem isn't that your brain's off the entire time for breathing. Otherwise, you would stop breathing during the day. Not cool. It's that it goes from on to off, on to off. So if we can do things to strengthen that pathway, it's more likely to stay on. Big part of this is phrenic nerve stimulation, which you can accomplish by just really making sure you breathe deeply through your diaphragm. So one way that you can do this, and don't do this if you're driving a tractor or yacht or some other big piece of something, is lay on the floor, put some books on your belly button area, and you just want to push the books up with your belly as much as you can when you breathe in, and then let the books sink down as much as they can when you breathe out. Really just focus in on that, because diaphragm breathing like this, and I would say this is the best way to really get this down, has been shown to increase the activity of the phrenic nerve. So what you can do, or you can consider, because if you do all these things together, you also save a whole lot of time. So laying like this with the books, paper bag, after your yerba mate, all that stuff, that would be the way to save the most time if you were to consider this. Right, again, under your doctor's supervision, my friend. Now, if you want to have that all written down, 'cause I know we went over a lot here, I got your back and some fun things here for you. Got the Central Sleep Apnea Guide, full episode summary, everything we talked about. And of course, if you want to be able to have even more tailored breathing exercises, got the Sleep Apnea Reset Protocol workshop for you, my friend. So in here, this is where we're looking at, hey, how do we help reset this breathing pattern even faster? So if you stack it with the things I said, would lead to even better improvements in that functionality to have good, happy airways open at night. So you can click that with a button somewhere on screen. Now, for either of them, they are also in the description box below. So you may have to click the title here if you're on your phone, opens up the description box. That's fun. That's cool. And then there also is, but I already told you this, so that's great. Now, those are the two doors. We'll go over the third one in a moment. Now, the if you're a URL kind of person, maybe just want to write it down, or you're watching this on your TV or tablet, and you got your phone nearby. Get the guide. Go to ochnow.com/central. Just type that in. Or if you want the reset protocol, go to ochnow.com/reset. Of course, got some QR codes available for you as well. So if you also just want to come up here to your TV or your tablet, use your one piece of technology for the other piece of technology, you can do that as well. And of course, make sure to subscribe because you're awesome if you do. And then the last thing, if you want us to really hold your hand through the process, guide you through a lot of things, so you are getting the most progress in the least amount of time you want to work with us, go to ochnow.com/next, or just scan that QR code to find that. Either way, you're a winner if you watch this video because you care about your health. And all you gotta do now is just take action on anything. Doesn't matter, just do something. So thank you so much for watching. Dylan here. See you later.